We are now live. Simha,
Great.
take it away.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'd like to welcome you to the September meeting of the Implementation Board of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. Before we begin, I'd like to remind people of our theory of change, as well as acknowledge the land on which we sit. First, in terms of the theory of change for the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, we believe that if we create a homelessness response system that centers people who have lived experience of homelessness, then we will be able to focus on responding to needs and eliminating inequities in order to end homelessness for all. We'd also like to acknowledge that the Regional Homelessness Authority and all of King County is located on the unceded traditional land of the Coast Salish peoples. We honor this land and its peoples past and present and are committed to directing funding and resources to organizations led by and in support of Native and Indigenous people. Today's implementation board meeting of the King County Regional Homeless Authority is happening both virtually here on Zoom, and also greatly appreciate the City of Auburn for allowing us to provide an in-person option as well in their chambers. So thank you both to City of Auburn, to the members who we have here with us, and to the public for joining us today. We'll be having public comment in just a moment. Public comment must directly address a portion of the agenda today, and each person will have 2 minutes for public comment. Before we get to that, I do want to just briefly preview kind of our agenda for today. We are going to change the scheduling of items just a little bit here today. We're going to move the discussion of bylaws up front after public comment, and then continue to have our detailed CEO update report from our CEO, Mark Dones. We'll discuss a new regional services database, which we're pretty excited about, and really focusing our efforts on talking about the 5-year plan as a group. And if you wouldn't mind calling roll call for us, that'd be appreciated.
I'm happy to. Pastor Carrie Anderson.
Present, thank you.
Nate Kamenos.
Here.
Gordon McHenry Jr. Michael Ramos.
Here.
Simha Reddy.
Present.
Juanita Spotted Elk. Juanita, I see you on screen. Can you give us a verbal confirmation, or I'll come back? Sarah Rankin?
Yeah. Here.
Got it. Sarah Rankin?
Here.
And we have 3 excused absences: Paula Carvalho, John Shelnick, and Damian Patino. And we do have a quorum.
Great. And thank you, Anne. Because we don't have, while we do have a quorum, we don't have 2/3 of our body here today, so we will skip over our consent agenda, which really just involved approving our August minutes, and we'll push that to our October meeting. So I want to remind the public that we would love to hear from you. Love to have your comments here with us today. You can type your name and into the chat, and we will call on you for 2 minutes of discussion. And if you are feeling shy, you can also write your comments into the chat, and we will read them aloud for you if you wish. But let me pause there and give the public a chance to sign up for public comment. You know, while we're waiting, I realize that I'd really hope to have Dan Gregory, our attorney who's been helping us with our bylaws, here to discuss that. So we may need to actually keep it towards the end or until she arrives. Mark, any thoughts on that?
Whatever works for you. I can go now, or I can go later.
Okay. Let's let the silence sit for a moment. Let the public jump in for briefly. Well, why don't we plan on having Mark give us our update? And I think this is particularly important because it's an opportunity to describe in sort of more detail the work plan you've been following, and kind of how far along you are on that, and you and your team are. So Mark, whenever you're ready, why don't we have you go ahead and start?
Sure. And confirming that we don't have anyone requesting public comment.
We do not have anyone requesting public comment at this time. Oh wait, Bill Carolyn Hackett, just in time.
Great.
Bill, we will promote you and you can go ahead. Hang on. Okay, Bill, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, thanks. I just saw Nigel. I was at the City Hall, ran back home. So today, according to the agenda, you're going to be hearing an overview of where we all are as KCRHA are going. Of course, a plan is necessary for our mutuality and for gaining necessary funding. No offense intended, but we who work now on the streets not only cannot wait, but are not waiting. On the streets of Seattle, where we work as vehicle residency outreach, it's a casualty zone. Many of you know this. Sweeps guised as removals hamper the work of rebuilding capacity among vulnerable people so that their habitation, tents, structures, vehicles are being removed since they are hazards. We are not waiting for the plan to reach us. Beyond our contracted work, we're starting right-of-way safe zones, working with Seattle. I'm calling them nests, 4 or 5 RVs with services, safety, and pathways to exit homelessness. We're not waiting for the system advocates to reach us. We're starting pairs of companions to be aligned with homeless persons and couples, to be present to alleviate isolation, to reduce stigmatization and criminalization, and to avoid at all costs abandonment. These 4 conditions sabotage well-being and any hope for what we all wish for, that is housing and stability for all. The plan lays it all out, and at the same time, we work to live out right now what we all say it is about. That is pathways to stability via partnerships, listening, and above all, refusing to abandon those for whom we make a plan. So I encourage you to work hard and swift. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. That was well under the 2-minute limit. I appreciate you. Is there anybody else who would like to provide public comment? Okay, if anybody joins and would like to say something, please put your comments in the chat. Thank you.
Great. With your permission, Chair, I will go ahead and get started.
Please go ahead. Thank you, CEO Downs.
Let me share my screen. All right. Today, I'm going to run through my update for you all. And then Alexis will discuss the regional services database and the 5-year plan framework. And then you all are scheduled to review draft bylaws. If at any point, Chair, you need to interrupt me to pivot to another portion of the agenda, please let me know. All right, I want to start, Chair, as you mentioned, with a high-level work plan. Per your request, I wanted to take a step back and let everybody know how I have been looking at time and what I have been trying to get done. From April 2021, when I was hired, to, I apologize, this should say December 2021, not December 2022, I was focused on agency ramp. So specifically focused on hiring a leadership team, hired about 30 people to drive sort of core functions of RHA work. In particular, was extremely focused with our Chief Program Officer, Peter Lynn, on the folks who were going to stand up the contracting system that we needed to have in place in order to ensure that on January 1, we would be able to start the process of contracting for all the funds that came over from the city, the county, and the feds. We also wanted to prioritize immediately our sub-regional planning engagement. And so one of our first hires was Alexis, who at the time was our sub-regional planning manager. She's now our director of sub-regional planning. Yay, Alexis. And began to immediately support her work in engaging communities across the county. We also were hit with a little bit of a surprise, a good surprise, but a surprise with the emergency housing voucher program that the feds rolled out, which rolled out in the summer of last year with a very aggressive deadline for developing a program and implementing it, which required a very close partnership with the 3 housing authorities in the county and the Lived Experience Coalition with whom we co-designed the project. And then we needed to set up a grants and contracts management system. Again, that's that work that most of the initial hiring was focused on. Nika Payne, who is here to support really just as a co-host today to make sure that everything goes smoothly, but is our Assistant Chief Administrative Officer for Operations, played an integral role actually in ensuring that our grants management system was stood up by December 31. Just as a reminder for the board and for the public, when I began in April, we did not have core infrastructure at all, right? Like we did not have a way to run payroll. We did not have a bank account. I didn't have an email address. So like real fundamental things had to be established over the course of that April to December timeline. So that's what I was predominantly focused on then from a work plan perspective. From January to March, I was extremely focused, again, alongside Peter Lynn, on contracting. So when we took over the system on January 1, what that meant is, yes, we assumed policy control. Yes, we had all the money, but that money was not contracted. And it needed to, all the contracts that came over from the city and the county needed to be reviewed, consolidated, and then put back out. Early in the fall, Peter and I made a decision not to bid anything out. We were looking at all of the infrastructure work we had to do and made a decision after talking with providers that like a real rebid of the system simply was not possible in the timeline that we had with the staff that we had at the time, alongside the administrative work we needed to do. And so we instead focused on building that core infrastructure so that we could put contracts in place. We received about 320 contracts, consolidated them down to around 215, and then began the process of getting them out and getting them inked. There was a lot of good back and forth with providers during that time, making sure that the contracts were right, reconciling differences between old city and county contracts in terms of metrics, in terms of funding, in terms of amounts of funding, et cetera, et cetera. We also engaged in quite a bit of severe weather response, which has been unfortunately a thing that I've now had to run multiple severe weather responses. Alexis has been an invaluable partner in that work as well, helping to organize across all 7 of our subregions. When we took control of the system, we were in a severe weather event. It was that extreme cold event that happened over, between Christmas and a little bit past the new year. And so literally as we were stepping into our role, Alexis and I both were on daily coordination calls with the subregions, with the city of Seattle and the emergency operations centers, trying to make sure that we were maximizing the support that we were offering our unhoused neighbors. We were also very focused on launching Partnership for Zero, which is our sort of flagship downtown work. I was at the time doing a lot of work with the We Are In folks, Felicia Salcedo, and also with the Ballmer Group, beginning to shape what that work would look like, and also having preliminary discussions with HUD that led to our HUD TA that is now on site, helping us launch our Housing Command Center. We also established work groups focused on vehicle residency, folks with high acuity, ran RFPs for new pieces of work, and then needed to run our point in time count. And as folks may be aware, myself and Daniil Bezemer and Owen Kafis, who were, Daniil is no longer with the authority, unfortunately. Owen is the acting chief of community impact. We co-designed our modified point in time count with the Lived Experience Coalition and the University of Washington, received a special methods exception from HUD to pilot this new approach, and did some I hope field transforming work, frankly, in how we approached thinking about engaging our unsheltered neighbors for the purposes of the count, both from a statistical validity perspective, like do we trust the number, and then also added a significant qualitative dimension. So collected over 500 oral histories from people who are currently experiencing unsheltered homelessness. For members of the public and for members of the board, in case you missed it, that approach was written up in the Washington Post about 2.5 weeks ago, I believe, to sort of lift up how innovative it was. April to July, again, continuing to focus on our sub-regional engagement, the creation of a regional services database, which Alexis will present on today, really launching our 5-year plan, public and provider engagement, drafted an ombuds charter, which really delineates the role of the ombuds from my role and engagement with the LEC. We ran an RFP for the Seattle Safe Lot, put out RFIs on reprocurement, and the big pieces of work were really in the ramping up of the system advocate team. That is our peer navigation team, and then also developing our 2023 budget proposal, which was led by Meg Barclay, our chief administrative officer, who's joined the line, as well as Tiffany Brooks, our assistant chief for finance. And now, running through the end of the year, very focused on getting the 5-year plan finalized. That is my top priority. You'll hear about where we are in that workflow today. We are also, as part of that work, doing some gaps analysis and modeling with partners in the community. Again, the LEC is deeply involved in that work, and we have some technical assistance support from Cloudburst. Our Housing Command Center, really the heart of the Partnership for Zero work, is becoming operational. We meet in the Seattle Emergency Operations Center daily from 10 to 11:30. It has been an incredibly productive time as we stand that up. We expect to be operational and making housing placements, I think, in early October. We have done state right-of-way work. Inside of that, we secured an additional $49.6 million to activate a number of emergency housing units, permanent supportive housing units, and fund field and outreach teams to connect with people to help them get inside. We have resolved 3 encampments over the course of the summer through that project, bringing in a little under 100 people. The RFIs for supportive housing have gone out. We are working right now on our HUD COC application. So the continuum of care application, which brings in the vast majority of our federal funding, is due shortly. And so we're getting that done. And the budget process for both city and county will begin at the end of September. And so that will take quite a bit of my time as well. And then for January and March, we will begin phased system reprocurement and implement any new priorities that are funded. We are also, my leadership team and I will be doing a step back in October to do detailed work planning for the entirety of FY23, and happy to bring that to you, Chair, and the rest of the board for your review once that's done. And I'll pause for any questions there.
Thanks so much, Mark.
I do want to note that Lamont Green has joined.
Thank you, Anne. I've got a couple questions, but I'm going to hold for a moment and see what our other board members have questions about. This is a huge number of projects and subjects. I think Sarah had mentioned in the chat that wouldn't it be great to have a tour of the Housing Command Center for the implementation board members, and I think that's a great idea. But Mark, can you tell us a little bit more about the Housing Command Center? What does that mean? Who's there? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so the Housing Command Center has representatives from HUD, from RHA, from a number of different teams. So we've got our coordinated entry team, myself, our Partnership for Zero director, our system advocate team, all coming into one place to work together. We also have the Seattle Mayor's Office and the county as well. And the work is, and some of our provider partners, and the work, sorry, forgetting, and the Lived Experience Coalition. And the work is really focused on one, as I think was just evident based on the number of people I listed, de-siloing, right? Like, we need to act as a system, and that is only possible when we start operating outside of silos and really begin to break down both internal to organizations and also across organizations, barriers that prevent communication, and actively solve problems every day. Right now, what we're doing is developing a bank of housing units. We're looking to get to, right now we have about 100 identified. We're looking to get to about 800 units of housing identified to make placements into through as we work to resolve encampments and unsheltered chronic homelessness across the downtown core. So the central focus right now, every day, is ensuring that the pieces are all in place to activate that work. So we've got a data team that has been meeting daily outside of just the regular UCC stand-up to talk about, like, what information are we collecting, how are we collecting it, how are we measuring our success, et cetera. We've got a comms team that's been meeting about 3 times a week. We have a field team that meets every day and talks about, like, you know, who have they connected with, what are they learning about what people's needs are, how many people are on our by name list, et cetera. And when we hit early October, our goal is to be, so that's like in 2 weeks or a week and a half, really, right? Like, our goal is to be in a position where we have, you know, several hundred units of housing identified. Those will be things that are in the market. Those will be permanent supportive housing. They're, you know, a variety of types. And to begin making placements, right? To begin working through our by name list to place people into housing. And the work that will happen every day in the Housing Command Center will be identifying who is going into housing that day, what supports they need to make sure that that is successful, any barriers that have been identified. We'll run through the list, we'll get everybody placed, and then we'll reset and do it again the next day.
Pastor Kerry Anderson.
Thank you. I just wanted to commend Mark in this very, very comprehensive report. And one of the things that I wanted to say is that I appreciated the culture that you're building, because as you were stating, you know, you started from zero, didn't have staff, didn't have bank account, didn't have anything, and you really built a strong culture. here to advance the mission of the organization. One of the things that impacted me personally in particular was the missteps of communication with the tiny houses. And I really wanted to just comment on how you troubleshot that in a positive way. And so let me just say thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mark, one of the things I've been curious about is, as part of the point in time count, 500 in-depth interviews with people experiencing homelessness now that is an incredible trove of qualitative data, right? Like there are solutions in there and problems that we haven't seen yet. Like, how are we going to analyze that? And if you've already started analyzing, what have you seen coming out of it?
We are analyzing it, and I'm actually quite proud of this because we're analyzing it through a community-based participatory research lens, which means that my team is doing some of the analysis, but the LEC is doing the analysis. People who are experiencing homelessness are getting trained in qualitative research and are helping to lead the analysis of those oral histories, both from a just going through them and coding them, but also framing what are the research questions? What do we want to know from that data, right? And so it's a place where as a social scientist, I'm sorry I get a little jazzed about this kind of stuff, but it is really exciting to see the people who are most impacted leading, not just on this program development or outreach, right? But also inside the the epistemological questions, right? What do we know? Why do we need to know it, right? And that I think is a really radical departure from how oftentimes the work has been done. The first round of analysis is really focused on supporting the 5-year plan. And so what folks are really combing through that data for is household typologies, essentially, right? So what are we seeing people saying their needs are? At what frequency are we seeing that? And how are we then modeling a emergency housing unit count that is not just an accurate number of how many beds are needed, but also looking at what services might need to be attached to those, right? So that are we saying, what percentage are we saying need a lot of support? What percentage are we saying are young people? What percentage are vet, right? These are things that data will help answer. And then I believe that the deadline for some of that initial work is 2 days from now on the 16th. And after that, there's going to be a step back, and that lived experience qualitative research team is going to take a step back and say, now what do we want to know? And start looking at framing up what the next research questions are, what reports they want to issue over the coming year using that data.
Council, Board Member Rankin.
Thanks so much for all of this information, Mark. It's really impressive. I wanted to back up and ask if on the point in time count front, which sounds like it was some sort of formal partnership with you, Deb, or whatever, is there any place where the methodology and sort of the breakdown of the data exists that's available? I'm just sort of curious in the wonky about the wonky stuff and seeing how it all sort of lines up since we've had so many different approaches. So wondering if there's anywhere where the methodology exists or where the data exists that others could look at.
There's a one-pager that goes over the methodology that I can share with you. I suspect it won't answer your level of question, given knowing you over the years, Sarah. And so I think that what would actually be best is to connect you directly with Owen, and he can just chat with you through the methodology, and obviously we'll send you the one-pager. I expect that you won't be satisfied and that the best thing to do would be to have that conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, I get this question. Part of the reason why I'm so curious about it is because I get this question a lot from, sort of the data and policy side is
Yeah.
how are the numbers collected? What is the methodology? And so just thinking as a matter of sort of being able to explain it publicly to others, being able to have a better sense of how the methodology works would be useful for folks who are interested on the implementation board. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions, comments on this slide? You've gone through a full one slide, Mark. Glad.
Trying to condense.
Well, this is great. Yeah, if you'd like to. Anything else you'd like to share with us, Mark?
No, I think, I will just note that today we were about 83 people, I think. So, really have gone in about a year from one person with no email address to an organization. And I will say, I am proud of the work that we have done as a team to make that happen. It was not, and I want to be clear, as a team, this was not a Doan's show. This was, Meg and Peter and Anne and Helen. Peter was employee 2, right? Alexis, I think, was employee 4. So we have been working really, really hard as a team. And the result of that, I think, I'll add, I think a result of how we have worked together, our required state audit was completed and is clean. It will be officially released, I believe, tomorrow or the day after, and we'll, send the reports to you all. But our financial process, all of it, we're running a tight ship.
That's great. Wonderful to hear. Thank you, Mark.
Should I move forward?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Awesome. I want to talk a little bit more about the encampment resolutions we've run thus far over the summer. So as I mentioned, we have resolved 3 encampments with nearly 100 people housed in 2 months. I want to note that those folks are inside. And I think that's why we call it a resolution, is people are inside. And our largest was the encampment at Dearborn and 10th, where we engaged over 80 people and were able to provide services and supports to everyone we had. Of all of those folks, we had 1 person decline services. And I want to be really clear about that, because there is a pervasive myth that people just turn down stuff, and that's not true, right? When we approach people with a housing opportunity, the answer is yes. And it is essential that we hear that as a community and hear that as we think about budget and policy, right? That when we offer people emergency housing, they say yes. And so the idea that there are just people out there saying no, 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 they are saying no to things that don't work for them. And when we offer them housing, they say yes. We have more resolutions planned. As I mentioned, I think this is 49.6, I need to confirm, million through Governor Inslee's right-of-way safety initiative. What we have used to fund, or what we have funded thus far, there's more that's going to come, is 58 units of permanent supportive housing. That is not online yet. It will come online later, I think early winter. We have 80 units of emergency housing. We've set aside 12 million to fund additional permanent supportive housing or master lease buildings, right? We're not sure what we're going to do, but we whatever will rapidly bring us more housing, right? that's the thing we're going to put that money into. We just need to identify, frankly, what will do it fastest. And we're in conversation with, our partners at the city of Seattle, our partners at the county, community partners, right? Trying to identify those paths right now. I would expect that we'll be making some announcements about what we are funding in the coming weeks. And then we have intensive outreach and service matching through Just Care and Reach. And again, this is not just an RHA show. Collaboration is the name of the game here, right? So we are profoundly collaborative with our provider partners and also with our government partners. So want to give thanks to WSDOT, Washington State Patrol, Department of Commerce, the City of Seattle, King County, and of course our team here for really making this possible.
I think Sarah has a question.
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Lamont because I already asked one, so I'll wait until after Lamont asks his question.
Thank you, Sarah. No, thank you, Mark, for sharing this. I wonder, and I know it's come up before, like the Dearborn Encampment Resolution was done wonderfully, right? And that was a high-profile event. It had elected officials and media there, but it's undeniable that it went well, and everyone that wanted safe and stable housing of their choice or some other safe shelter got that. But unfortunately, this isn't the model that's happening across our county. And there's more of a sweep approach. And when we connect with our unhoused neighbors, it's just horribly sad how this is happening. And it feels like when people don't have a place to go, they're getting on the edge of the freeway. What's the next place? To have a tent on the freeway if they can't be in public spaces and there's not enough housing. So what I'm hoping is that how can we take what happened at Dearborn and institute that as a model and a guiding practice that all of us utilize? King County Regional Homeless Authority, the City of Seattle, Auburn, Renton, all of us, that this becomes the standard practice. And so my question is basically, how can we institutionalize this as our practice of encampment resolutions versus some of the sweeps, that are happening?
I don't necessarily have a good answer to that because I think that's a question directed to other people who run other things, right? Like this is our approach. We are going to put our resources and our weight behind advocating for it, being clear that this is the way that we see success, right? And again, that everyone comes inside, right? That it is that again, that myth of people declining, that those things are not things that we need to live inside of. I think that through our Housing Command Center and our Partnership for Zero work, we are accelerating a lot of our coordination with the City of Seattle and King County, particularly around the downtown core. But I think and I'll talk about a little bit more about this on the slides following. But for us, this was really about piloting an approach to stress test a set of operational concepts. They have proven successful, and our budget preemptively reflected that we thought they would be successful, right? So our hope is that, through investment, we are able to online more things that allow us to scale what we are currently doing across the entire county.
No, I appreciate that, Mark. I just for this board, I think it's really urgent that I don't know how we can bring together the community in a way to develop a strategy that we, as all parts of King County can agree on, because it's just sad when you see sweeps happening and you see elder adults in wheelchairs and people scrambling to find another place and not having that support. So I just think that this is tremendously urgent. Thank you.
Sarah?
Yeah, I just want to hold up what Lamont was saying. I think that as a board, part of our responsibility is to elevate best practices and to educate and advocate for things that are going to be successful at resolving homelessness in our region. And so I think it would be worthwhile for us to think about how we can gather more information about all of the wonderful stuff, Mark, that the authority did here, and hold it out as something that should be followed in other places. It should be replicated, right? And so being able to sort of hold this up, I think is important. So I just wanted to give a little more airtime to that. Then I have a sort of a technical question, because it seems clear that obviously in order to have a successful resolution, you need to have a place for housing, right? As opposed to sort of like temporary shelters or whatever for people to go to. Is all of the, you've got 58 and then 80 units and some other units that sounded to me like you were saying these are all newly created units of housing that didn't exist prior to this funding from the Right-of-Way Safety Initiative. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so, I guess another question I would have is, how can we continue to replicate this, right, in terms of funding and thinking about other ways to bring housing online so that the strategies you're talking about are best practices, but how also can we start thinking about making sure that it's not just a, sort of a one-way hit of funding, but something that can be replicable?
On that front, I think, it's just really important that our state legislative colleagues and the governor's office hear that this works, right? I have some slides on the model that we are working inside of that I can walk through. I'm seeing in the chat that I think the chair needs me to pause though, so that you all can have a bylaws conversation. But when I rejoin, I can talk through the model, and I think that will help equip the board and community members with some of the talking points and the knowledge necessary to engage appropriators and policymakers to continue to support this direction.
Thank you, Mark. And to the board and the public, I apologize for breaking in the middle of this conversation. I think it's incredibly important, and we are going to come back to it. I do want to make sure we have just a brief period of time with our attorney, Deanna, before she has to break off. So I was hoping to at least discuss the bylaws briefly and allow time for discussion and questions from the board members. Deanna, is that okay with you?
Yeah, it sounds great.
Fantastic. I don't know if you'd like to bring up the bylaws as we're talking about them, but each of the board members should have that available to them as well. Hopefully you've had a chance to review them.
Whatever works best for you all. I'm Deanna Gregory, by the way. I'm a partner at Pacifica Law Group and serve as one of the members of the team here as outside general counsel to the RHA. And in front of you, you should have what we've drilled down into a chart now, which is the draft bylaws on my left-hand side. And then the column to the right-hand side has the either the source of the item that's in the bylaws. So source, a link back to or a reference to the section of the interlocal agreement where the language in the bylaws comes from, or an explanation, if you will, of the kind of the reason behind that kind of language. The interlocal agreement, of course, is the the skeleton of the RHA, and so we're just building onto that. And so this document needs to be consistent with and also can help to provide additional, which is the goal, provide additional guidance for the operations of this board and all of your respective membership to the board. I know that this group has already gone through quite a bit of the bylaws and substance. So I don't know if you want to open it up for questions or start where you all had left off before. whatever will be helpful.
Well, thanks so much, Deanna. And I think the big difference between this version and the, one of the biggest differences between this version and the last version is we really, that sort of comment section on the side, sort of breaking it down for us, what each topic is about. That obviously won't be in the formal bylaws, but helpful for us to in our discussion. We also, Dana, you and the group that discussed it, took the feedback from our last session, which really, which talked about sort of alternates and like, what is the role of alternates, and should we have alternates for everybody or not? And I think the general consensus we'd come to was, having an alternate for every single person on this board creates a quite unwieldy process and a very large board. But it is incredibly important, specifically for the Lived Experience Coalition, or those with lived experience who are on the board, to have alternates. And we wanted to prioritize finding a way to do that. But I'm going to pause for a moment. Hopefully our board members have had a chance to review these bylaws. Does anyone have specific questions right now that they've been wondering about? I'm going to assume everybody's totally in agreement with everything they've seen. So
Lamont's got his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, great.
Thanks. Lamont, yes. If you'd like to.
No, thanks, Sima. It's not related to the alternates, but I know that in the Island Charter it talks about an equity-based decision-making framework. And I believe Aaron Bryant, the equity director at King County Regional Homeless Authority, came and did a presentation. But I'm really curious about how does that fit into this bylaw, where we're leaning into having an equity-based decision-making framework to guide our decisions, so that we're not unintentionally, contributing to racial disparities. And I know Aaron mentioned, excuse me, my phone alarm. I know Aaron had mentioned coming and helping and working with us on that, but I think that's something that would be important to note in our bylaws. And maybe that's already articulated. Oh, there it is.
There it is. Yeah.
Sorry.
So
Thank you.
you're spot on, and I appreciate that comment. We in the discussions, and you can see it there highlighted in section 1.02 under the guiding principles. That concept was definitely there was a preference to and a need to bring that concept forward and incorporate them explicitly into these bylaws. And so it is listed there. And then, just to reiterate as kind of the additional kind of framework for for the board's operations, and then it will be in the day-to-day operations of implementing that principle that you all will, you have at your fingertips.
I see. Do you think that it's that the guiding, I see where it needs to be there as well, but is there another section where that would be relevant? Because it seems like how we operationalize and make it happen versus just a principle.
You certainly could, if you would like to, either in these bylaws, lay out more detail for how to really implement that principle. That would be appropriate for these bylaws. You could also do it in a separate policy and procedure. There's a whole host of ways that you could do it, and to really lay out some very specific, I almost said the word principles again, but very specific, almost method of how to implement this concept. I defer back to the rest of the team if there's something specific that you'd like to include in the bylaws themselves, or whether you'd like to do it in more of a like a policy or a procedure relating to that concept specifically, because that's also a way that you could do that.
I wonder if we could have Erin and her team maybe do an equity review of this and offer up insights to us on how to integrate it into this document.
Actually, just one clarifying question before I turn to Sarah. When you first asked your question, I was actually wondering whether you had hoped to have the process of creating or approving the bylaws actually pass through an equity decision-making framework, like having Aaron or someone else sort of lead us through that and make sure that the bylaws are consistent with our approach.
Sima, that would be super awesome.
Okay.
That would be amazing, because actually we get to learn and engage in the process and do it from the very beginning. So I would love that. Thank you.
I'm sorry, did I interrupted you, Sarah, because you had a question?
No, not at all. I think it's a really important question, and suggestion, a question that Lamont asked, and suggestion, I guess, that you're sort of indirectly making, Simha, because I do think having the words there is one thing, but you know, we all have a different understanding, I think, or could have a different understanding of what those words mean. And there's a big difference between having those words in this document and actually having a shared understanding of how we're going to embody them in the work that the implementation board does. And I think that the alternates, you know, discussion is a really good example of that, because I understand, for example, that the proposal in the language is that the alternates that there be a certain number of alternates that are afforded for the lived experience coalition, but there are also sort of restrictions on it that I am concerned about could really create inequities and create obstacles for people with lived experience to be able to meaningfully participate on the implementation board, and also for the LEC's interest in really growing the leadership experience and empowering you know, more members of their board. So you know, if we needed a study, I think of where we could, you know, benefit from a little more clarity and shared purpose around some of those terms that Lamont was just talking about. This would be a good example, I think, of where we might start with differences of opinion about what sorts of procedures, you know, would be best practices under sort of a more of a corporate approach to bylaws versus what would truly be equitable approaches to some of these provisions when we're really talking about trying to center the theory of change and to center people with lived experience as real power holders in the work of the implementation board.
Thanks, Sarah. And we'll share Lamont's shared a comment in the chat that the equity-based decision framework could help us gain clarity on that together. And we'll make sure to get you those documents again separately, and if you could send those as soon as you can, that'd be great. We will not be taking a vote on this, just for clarity's sake, because we're missing a number of board members. And to frame this discussion around alternates, if that's okay, Deanna and Sarah, the discussion we had was one of like, hey, the ILA doesn't actually have a like very specific process for how do you appoint alternates, right? And so, you know, I think the recommendation from you, Deanna, was, well, we should follow the same process as for regular members. And I think, Sarah, you correct me if I'm misrepresenting your position, that hey, that may create obstacles for people with lived experience to go through that process.
I think it could be useful. You know, I won't throw it on Lamont and Juanita, you know, to explain further, but based on my experience participating in the LEC, I see how important fluidity, support, and empowerment is to allowing people with lived experience to meaningfully engage. And so, as you can appreciate, when people are dealing with homelessness, it becomes very difficult, even more challenging than it is for someone who's housed, to anticipate, where they're, where they could possibly be and what the circumstances are in the next hour, much less over the course of the next year or 3 years. And so if you put that sort of concept to apply to the idea of having even alternates have to be approved beforehand, a limited set of alternates being approved beforehand by the governing committee, it cramps the ability for the LEC to be able to fluidly respond, to meaningfully engage their members, and in the work of the implementation board. So it's not that I don't understand the benefits, so they're very common sort of things to want to have a set number of people who are approved by, some sort of higher power in this process. I get what the different interests are in the proposed procedure that's written here, but I have grave concerns about how that squares up with equity and the theory of change when we're talking about really trying to afford fluidity, support, or flexibility and support and empowerment to people who are, who are part of the LEC.
And I'd be happy to speak with that. I think it's a really good point. I know we've had a conversation about this before. The goal around having alternates, as was mentioned, the alternates concept comes up. It comes up twice in the interlocal agreement, and really it's just a reference. If there are alternates, or any board member who's attending as an alternate will attend, according to bylaws or policies and procedures. And so the bylaws is really where the framework around having alternates will be. Again, it provides a roadmap for you all who are participating in a meeting as an alternate, but which I agree, the goal is to have flexibility. That's one reason why you have alternates in the first place, is to provide for that flexibility. But it's a balance between having the flexibility and also the procedural goals of making sure from a administrative procedural standpoint that the approved board members, and I properly designated probably as that, or appointed board members who are able to serve as alternates, are the ones who are attending the meetings. In my experience working with interlocal entities that have alternates available, if the primary board member cannot attend, the question has come up in the audit context of whether, from the state auditor and the state auditor's analysts, about whether or not the correct number, for example, of board members were at the table for purposes of establishing a quorum or for voting on issues. And so through that experience, it has become, I guess, brought to our attention that it is important for, not only this flexibility standpoint of having options when it comes to, needing to be flexible with schedules, but also just making sure that the right, the properly designated people are there. So when you are voting on contracts and resolutions and other things, that it was properly approved according to your governing documents. And an auditor may look at that. They have in the past in other contexts. So this is really intended to put the RHA and the implementation board in the best possible position going forward, understanding that there's no really right or wrong answer because the ILA doesn't require any specific process. What's been proposed is following the same approval or confirmation process as with the primary board members representing those with lived experience. So our thought was, and just kind of a hypothetical, was that there could be a slate of members who are confirmed through that process, not only the kind of 3 primary, but also the 3 alternates. So they're almost like standing alternates for the year, for example. I definitely appreciate the administrative kind of hassle of having to get someone approved for at the last minute for a board meeting. But from an administrative standpoint, we want to keep from a procedural side, we want to avoid that if possible anyway. So maybe there's a way to have more alternates or go through some kind of process. So there is that flexibility that you mentioned and the fluidity while still having the kind of the knowns. Because not only is it important from a procedural approval process, but being a member of the board and being a confirmed or an appointed alternate also leads to things like attorney-client privilege, who can attend executive sessions, and your duties as a board member, which extend to a whole host of things under Washington law as a public body. There's kind of a nice balance. There's a balance there that I would recommend that we try to reach.
Thank you, Deanna. Sarah, maybe one last comment, and then we can.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I would be interested to hear what Lamont or what Juanita might say, and maybe we need just more time to discuss it. But I appreciate the point. I mean, I'm a lawyer too. I get procedure. I understand all this. But I think that the way that we're used to thinking about power and the way that we're used to thinking about procedure needs to catch up with equity. So I'll say this, I share your optimism that we can find a balance that serves the procedural interests with true equity. I don't think this draft is it. I don't think this draft does that yet, but I think we can get there.
I noticed that Juanita had left a comment as well that she liked the recommendation for Erin and her team to weigh in on a deep dive. Can I, sorry, Lamont, I see your hand is raised.
No, I'll just be real quick. No, Sarah, I agree with you. I think that we do need to find more of a balance, and thank you, Deanna, for your approach too and your summary. And I think even at the Lived Experience Coalition, we're talking about how can we get more people with lived experience in these positions who are maybe still experiencing homelessness or have just come out of homelessness and they're fighting to get their kids back, and all the things that you're doing to get your life back. Because when they're sitting at the table and they're engaging, they're able to give us real-time information about what's going on, and that's invaluable to our strategy. But in order to do that, we're going to have to be really flexible, because it's a very different situation for us that have, who've been stably housed for a long time. So I just appreciate, Sarah, you lifting this up, and I just really appreciate the board for being very supportive of having our unhoused neighbors here.
Thanks, Lamont. Can I make one suggestion? And we're not going to vote on this, but what I'm hearing is a desire to sort of accomplish a couple of goals, right? How do we maximize sort of how do we pass this through an equity decision making framework, one that sort of really thinks about equity and power structures, and come out with a process that provides clarity and lives within the confines of the ILA. And perhaps since we have some in-house expertise in Erin, and if Deanna, you'd be open to sitting, having a group discussion with any board members who are interested, but Deanna and Erin both together to talk through possibilities. I know for the public, this may feel really dry around bylaws, but this is, I think, really important. And I want to give it the time and space that it needs. Anybody have objections to sort of that approach? Okay. Well, Deanna, I know you have to leave. We will, as a group, come back to this discussion about bylaws, but we have a fair bit else to get through as a board to make sure that we're providing the oversight and guidance that we need to.
Thanks a lot, Deanna, for everything you've been doing on this. It's hard stuff.
Oh, my pleasure. Happy to help. Thank you.
Mark, if you're available, if you'd like to resume your discussion, we'd love to hear the rest of it. I think you're going to do a sort of deeper dive into the how to do encampment resolution.
Yes, I am available, it turns out.
Thank you.
Part of my job. Give me 1 second to share my screen again. Okay. Catching up. Okay. So talking a little bit more, I think, in response to Sarah's questions and you know, some of the other conversation, I wanted to be really clear that, like, in piloting an approach here, we were aiming for 3 things: speed, housing first orientation, and person-centered work, right? Like, and I want to sort of lay out, like, why are those the goals? One, we are an emergency response system, and everything that you are seeing us do is oriented towards being in that posture. And one of the things every emergency response system is judged by is how fast they solve a problem, right? Like that, like, you know, if we are looking at, you know, someone has a heart attack, the emergency response system is judged by how quickly do you get that person to the hospital, right? The hospital is judged by how quickly you stabilize the person. And so speed is not, and I think this is I just want to be really transparent, right? Like, the speed aspect is not, you know, political in nature. It is what emergency response systems are supposed to do. And what we really also wanted to do was operationalize housing first, right? So, like, it is one thing to say housing first over and over and over and over again. It's another thing to make a system housing first. And we really wanted to, again, eliminate this idea that shelter was necessary at all, and instead think more aggressively about how we could move people into housing as quickly as possible. And then again, you know, we want, like, it should not be traumatic, right? Like, how we engage people should be oriented around their needs and really focused on their self-determination and ability to activate and make choice. So these were the 3 things we were focused on achieving. And you know, again, this slide is just like, why are we doing these things? Because this is a crisis response. And so essentially, if, you know, again, if there's an incident outside that is medical, the ways that people get to the solution are they can take themselves, or, right, an ambulance can take them. And in all instances, we're looking at how quickly can those things happen. What we really looked at was saying, okay, so we've got our unsheltered neighbors. We are going to create some emergency housing, and we have permanent housing already, and we're going to create more, right? And our goal, which we activated, was to say we should be able to create a structure by which people, through outreach and intensive case management, can rapidly go to emergency housing, and then from there rapidly transition to permanent housing, right? And the idea is that, you know, again, you've got outreach and intensive case management supporting people coming into emergency housing, and then you have supportive services that undergird the emergency housing and permanent housing sort of across that continuum, right? And what we found is that, yes, we can do this. Right? And that, like, again, some of this idea that some people can go directly to the end point, that permanent housing, not even emergency housing, right, is also possible. And I mentioned this before, but just to reiterate, on the day that I was on site, you know, working to ramp down our activity at Dearborn, we had people going to sign leases for where they will be forever, right? And so it is possible to cut out any of our sort of middle requirements and move directly into just rehousing people. So our goal, right, our potential future state is to actually have fewer people moving through emergency housing and more people moving directly to permanent housing. And how, like, where we're going to stress test this in the near term, right? Because this is, I want to be really clear again with the board and with the public. When I talk about changes that we're going to adopt or explore, I am trying my best not to talk about things that'll happen in 2 years, right? Because people are outside today and they deserve our urgency when it comes to implementing these shifts. And so the Housing Command Center work that is, again, that core of Partnership for Zero is going to seek to pilot this future state starting next month, right? Where, again, we are saying everyone goes to housing, right? And we try to use our emergency housing as little as possible. I'm going to pause there. Any questions about sort of the model, or does that help meet your needs, Sarah? Awesome. So I just want to say a little bit about like emergency housing. What's that? Right? Like, so these are some photos of like what we have classed as emergency housing at the authority, right? So you'll note that like the focus is dignity, privacy, and care. So these are individual spaces that people have. You know, they can be for one person, they can be for couples, they have the ability to take pets, right? What you'll notice is that, you know, so for example, in this, you can see in the picture on the left, right, there's a little sink, right? For some of our spaces, we're not able to have like full bathrooms attached. So there might be shared bathrooms, but we really try to make sure that people at minimum have water closets, right? Where they're able to, you know, brush their teeth, do as much as you can in space that is yours, right? You know, so you'll see again that little microwave in the corner of the picture on the right. What we also have, obviously no one is living in these rooms, that's why they are quite sparse. We also have at the places where these come from, right, full kitchens, multiple full kitchens that residents can use whenever they want to cook something, right? So it isn't a you know, oh, well, this is the microwave, and like if you can't microwave it, good luck, right? Like people can buy groceries, they can store their own food, they can cook their own food, because the goal is really to you know, be to set people up, right, for again that dignity, privacy, and like just able to live their own lives. I want to be really clear, I would like to get to a place where we can fund places where people have their own bathrooms and kitchens, right? Like that would be ideal. But we're not there from a budget perspective. So this is what we do currently, with the hope, right, that we will build the funding to continue to provide something that is more and more apartment-like and less, you know, sort of relying on that shared living. In our emergency housing spaces, again, going back to the prior slide, we are providing supportive services. And so what I want everyone else to hear, right, again, is like, there's been a lot of concern about housing first models, because the idea is, oh, you stick people somewhere and you abandon them. That is not what we are doing, right? We are providing people with services, and we are providing people with choice in those services, right? You can choose which services make sense for you. They're not required. But what we have to have an eye on is scaling our capacity to provide support to people who need it, at the same time that we scale our capacity in terms of physical spaces for people to be. And much of, I think, where we've seen housing first as a system orientation fail to really be as transformative as we'd like is, one, we're just not actually doing it. Like, we're not actually moving people from unhoused positions to housed positions. We are moving people into shelter and somehow calling that housing first, and it isn't. And then the second thing I would say is, like, we have not done as much work about being clear about scaling those supportive services and the option for those supportive services in relationship to our physical assets. And much of what, you know, the federal government is beginning to talk about is how do those two things align and begin to move in more of a lockstep so that people have that reservoir of service to access if they need it. Again, it is optional though. So for our resolution model, right, like it's that intensive outreach, the supportive services, emergency housing. Right now we have 80 units. And I just want to lift up, right, that like in our 23 budget, which you all approved, thank you, we assumed that this pilot would be successful. And so preemptively asked for money to expand our provider wages so that we, again, could make sure that we could support services across the continuum. And we asked for additional money to invest in emergency housing. I think that, like, you know, what we will continue to do though, as piloted through our Housing Command Center, is find ways to activate both our permanent supportive housing portfolio and the market so that emergency housing is not, again, the cornerstone, but it is an option, and we're trying to move people as rapidly as we can into permanent solutions. Sarah?
Thanks, Mark. So I love the puzzle picture, because in my own mind, I'm also trying to think about, I think the staffing issue is enormous, right?
Yep.
I mean, huge. And so I'm thinking about the last question I asked, which was, you know, how are we funding this, you know, the access to housing. And so thinking too about the questions for how are we funding adequate staffing.
Yeah.
Is there anything, I mean, I know you guys can't do everything under the planet, even though we're asking you to. I'm just wondering if there's anything that pulls all of this together in a document that says, you know, this is how much we're spending in our region on housing, you know, the different types of housing. This is how much we're spending on staffing, and this is how much we need to spend, and how much we need to spend on housing and staffing, just so that we can sort of get a sense of, like, I see these budget requests and I see those are increases, but I'm sure that those are conservative, right?
Yeah.
And not necessarily what we need. So as I think about our challenge, which is to try to really fully and robustly address homelessness in our region, what can the greater public look to help us understand what's currently being spent on housing and services, and what needs to be, like, what's the gap and the shortfall, and so that we have a sense of where we need to go. I'm not sure if I'm making sense.
No, you're making total sense. The answer is the 5-year plan. The 5-year plan will go through all of those things, inclusive of what is the unit gap and what is the staffing gap. And it'll break it down by needs and subpopulations as well, right? And Alexis will show you some of how we're approaching some of that today, like setting goals and then analyzing what it would cost to execute on those goals, right? But that's really where I think you'll get that detail.
Okay, and sorry, just one sort of follow-up question as I think about what will be happening in the 5-year plan. How much of this, and maybe this is just sort of like where my brain is at when we think about the charter of, you know, the interlocal agreement, and the charter of the Regional Homeless Authority. A lot of folks don't understand that the focuses of the authority is supposed to be just sort of on these emergency services side, as opposed to, you know, longer term solutions. How do you fit the 5-year plan into that really weird, it's like trying to put a square peg into a round hole sort of situation? How do we straddle that when we think about solving homelessness in our region, since the limit of the authority is specific, but the need is broader than that?
I think that, you know, that I love that question. I think it's in how we approach our assets. So part of the reason why you do not hear me talk, I mean, there are a lot of reasons why you don't hear me talking about congregate shelter. Let's be clear. but like one of the reasons is that it's a bad use of money, right? Like my job as a public administrator is to use public funding as best we can. And the best way to use public funding is housing. It is not congregate shelter, right? And so when I've discussed this with my colleagues at the city of Seattle and at the county, and I think we agree that if we all put our energy into the creation of housing, then we have a durable set of assets that any of us can use to meet any of the needs, right? So like, if I focus on emergency housing, emergencies in the name, I'm focused on something for people who are in a state of crisis and they need access to a thing right now, right? When we get out of the crisis, and we're gonna get out of it, right? When we get out of it, those assets can be rotated to serve low-income households. They can, serve young people. They can become anything, right? As opposed to if I took all of this public money and dumped it into the creation of congregate shelter, one, it's not going to get us the solution that we want. It's just not going to solve the problem. Two, let's say a magic wand gets waved and all of a sudden we have enough housing stock. Now we've wasted millions of dollars on assets that cannot be used for anything else.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Juanita?
I really like that model that you're talking about, Mark. I just wanted to raise that issue, how communication can be, is a barrier if not everyone's in unison with that framework, and for using the racial equity lens. And just real quick, with what happened to me recently, long story short, I had a voucher. It didn't get where it was going in the pre-pandemic, and got a lot of things had happened because systemic racism is very real and worse in some states. But anyway, that because I was on this board, I was not eligible for a voucher, emergency voucher, because I had lost mine. And working with a DV provider, 2 different ones, and it was really a hardship, and having 2 adult children and the historical trauma, of Native American people and brown and Black people and disability and other groups, it would really do a lot of help in just prevention for further trauma, and not having to go through those cycles again, and that emergency shelter, and eliminating that. I totally agree with what you just said, Mark, and I appreciate that. But even just in the organizations that I had worked with, the communication never got through somehow. So I went with another organization because they offered me an emergency voucher, and it ended up the communication between just that organization, how it fell through, and I got forgotten. And because, with my safety planning and all that, with being a DV survivor, it was such a it's a terrible experience. And then, so I just want to say thank you, Mark. I like that idea and how important it is everyone to be in communication with each other, and what's happening, and using the theory of change, and how that is such a critical, because everyone's in different spaces, just coming out of housing because of DV. And then also I'm trying to keep a roof over my head right now. And it is a crisis, like a mental health crisis. And it's very traumatic, and how the brain affects and reacts to all that stuff. And I just want to say, I appreciate the work that everyone does for helping others like myself, being able to be stable, to be able to have the opportunity to have my children with me and to work on those issues. So it's very real. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you. I'm gonna keep us moving. I'm a little worried about time for the other two things you're supposed to talk about today. So very quick, so for our Partnership for Zero work, which I mentioned a couple times, we have 17 systems advocates who are like out and about in the community. If you see someone in one of these KCRHA shirts, say hello. They are helping people. The Housing Command Center is operational with HUD support and City of Seattle support at the EOC. And our by name list has about 300 folks assessed so far, mapping encampments within the downtown core. In case you were sort of wondering what that looks like, this is a snapshot of what it looks like when one of us goes in the BNL and looks at what's called the management report, which is like what's happening, right? So what you can see here, this is from last week, but what you can see is, 297 folks had been assessed. What was interesting to me is about 23% of those folks were entirely new to HMIS. We had never seen them before. You can see the, breakdowns by race, huge overrepresentation of Black folks in particular, and then the distribution of folks from an age perspective. Not a lot of folks who are quite young, but we're seeing quite a bit, in the sort of 45 to 65 or above, right? A concern because we don't necessarily have, right, like the services designed for older folks, and in particular, this is not something we've talked about a lot as a board, but for the public's knowledge, I think most board members know this. When you are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, aging is different, and people, what the science has demonstrated is that like after a certain amount of time unsheltered, right? Like if you are 45, your body is 55. And so we want to think about, how that might be impacting folks and what kind of care and support they might need. Household composition, the vast majority of folks are single adults, but we do have a small number of folks with children. We've got a majority of folks who are male identified. I think, again, this is from last week. So I think this, there are more people who've been engaged since I pulled this out. I think, I'll just say that I don't think we've ever had this kind of data before, right? Like in this way, in a usable way. Right? Like, so like normally we see reports like this that are like, who did we see this year or this quarter, right? But the team goes in and looks at this every single day. And ultimately, this will be, we're developing in collaboration with Microsoft, a product that will allow us to, create sort of a my chart for our unhoused neighbors. And they'll be able to engage very differently with their advocates and with the other folks who are on their care team at other agencies. Emergency housing vouchers. So this is, again, as of last week when we had to distribute materials, I think this has gone up, but we're at about a 76% lease up rate. Over 1,000 households are now permanently housed. Our leasing rate is nearly double the national average and about 3 times that of our peer communities. That is entirely because we designed a program with the LEC and then leaned into a full community mobilization in order to make it happen. What I'll also lift up, and this is on the slide, is just that, like, I've heard over and over and over again, housing first can't work in King County because our market is so competitive, this, that, the other thing. And I just have to be clear, that's not true. Housing first works, and it can work even in incredibly competitive markets, full stop. Do we need more housing? Yeah, of course we need more housing. Like, that's not the question. But like, we can do better by people who are experiencing homelessness today by using housing first as a true system orientation and not just, words. So that, I think, is it for me. I think now you will hear from Alexis about the regional services database and or the 5-year planning. I think wherever you'd like to spend your time next, because I know you don't have much of it left. But are there any last questions for me before I'm off?
All right. Well, thank you, Mark. The rest of the time is yours, Mercedes.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen and happy to take it away from here. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you. No worries. I can go by both. I'm here first today to talk about an amazing tool that my team has been helping shepherd the development of, and that is our regional services database. And so the sub-regional planning team has made a commitment to each of our 7 identified subregions to develop tailored sub-regional plans. And to really advance that work, it was integral for us as the sub-regional planning team to hold a comprehensive understanding of all of our existing services and just really a good understanding of our landscape. And so what we've developed is a tool that will have multiple uses. And we've done this through a 5-step process. And so the first of which is really a robust data review. So for the first time ever, and by nature of just the structure and charge of the authority, all of these major data sets that are outlined on this slide live under one roof, which has given us the ability to crosswalk them in a way that just hasn't been done before. And so we dove into our HMIS data, really looking at not as much client level data, but program data. We also looked at the housing inventory count, which is our annual count of all beds and units in the system, and this is required by HUD. And then we looked at our project service agreements or our contracts to provide additional information about services, and then further looked at the data set that our coordinated entry team also had. And with that extensive review, we also then talked with our provider community to better understand additional information about the nature of services. And so while there is overlap between these data sets, each of them carries some unique information about our system, and being able to file that has been tremendously valuable. However, we also went deeper, and this was really driven by our engagement with the Lived Experience Coalition and with folks with lived experience. When we initially came forward to discuss what it would mean to pull together a landscape of all of our services in the region, we were really encouraged by our lived experience colleagues that if we were to do something like this, it would need to go deep. And we would need to look at a number of programmatic characteristics, because it's not just about a bed, it's about how long you can stay at that bed. Is it a bunk bed or in a room with other people, or is there a door you can close? Can my dog come with me? Are there meals there, and how many? Is there a connection to behavioral health supports or other physical health support services? And so we ended up looking at over 30 characteristics and at over 450 different programs. So we looked at programs such as day centers, hygiene programs, emergency shelter, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, permanent housing with supports, safe havens, safe parking, rapid rehousing, emergency housing voucher programs. And developed this really comprehensive database of all of these services. And with collecting all that information, then came the next stage, which was really coding out administrative data. And so what was involved in that process was actually taking a lot of information that you see on the left, which was in the format of narrative description, and coding it out into a system. So really trying to capture, kind of, for folks who have maybe a qualitative research background, reading and distilling down into codes based on generalized responses, and being able to code it into a data system to allow us to run filters and be able to pull out some trends. And so that was our coding process. We then ran a number of workshops with partners to further kind of gut test the system, gut test what we've put together. And in that process, really ask our provider community folks who work on the ground, is what we've pulled together consistent with your understanding of services, and received further guidance from partners on how to improve upon what we've put together, to add additional characteristics, to revise characteristics, and have gotten guidance on how to actually make something that will be useful and serve out a number of purposes. And so what we've developed is this comprehensive data set that is sortable by all of the characteristics, since it's all now coded into a system. So you can do a number of things to sort by city when you're looking at place-based services. You can look by sub-region. And I want to draw up two specific examples of ways that this could be used. For example, if you were working with an individual and say they were a single adult man with a dog currently in Seattle, you could go into this database and plug in those characteristics into the filter option. And with just a couple of clicks, you would then see an auto generation of all of the programs that that individual might be able to access. So that is how this tool could be used to be particularly helpful for folks who are trying to get folks connected to services. It can also be really helpful from a planning perspective if we're in conversation with, for example, our North King County partners. I know now I start walking into a meeting and pull up our, the North King County filter so I can take a specific look at all of our North King County programs, so I can ensure I'm coming into that conversation with a place of being grounded in reality of what is serving our North King County sub-region in terms of the homelessness system. So that is a bit about what we've created. We are slated for a public release at the end of September and continuing to do briefings and add some bit of improvements. I think this also begs the question, how do we keep it updated, and also how can we improve upon it? And we've set some pretty good internal protocols. We have a cross teams group that's meeting on a biweekly cadence for now. And we've created a centralized portal where the entire KCRHA is logging when we're hearing about programmatic changes. So for example, I'll even draw from a recent example when I had done a site visit, and in conversation and seeing the facility and talking with folks, the ED shared with me that they had just brought on board a behavioral health specialist as of a couple weeks ago. And so I would then go into our centralized portal and just jot that down to say, this program now is a behavioral health specialist on site. And essentially the work of that internal cross teams group would then review all of the entries that go into that portal and make adjustments to the landscape to prepare for a revised release. So we're trying to be disciplined on our side to ensure that we can allow for systematic, accurate updates to really keep an up-to-date resource available for public providers and folks who are doing the work. So with that, would love to take questions about what we've put together.
Well, this is fantastic work, Alexis. I think the public and the rest of us will be excited to see when it comes out at the end of September. Although my guess is that a lot of us are really excited to talk about the 5-year plan though as well. So
Happy to move us forward. Are there any other questions, comments, or concerns on this topic? All right, then we'll get to the main topic for today, which is talking about our 5-year plan, which we're really viewing as our strategic roadmap to transform the system. So our intent for today's discussion is I'm going to first do a review of our proposed system goals, do a bit of lead up and context setting as to the work that's gone into what's being brought forward to you today, and then a review of our proposed system goals, discussing our supporting draft objectives, then going into next steps for further development, so to clue you all into how the work will be carried forward. We'd like to carve out time, of course, for feedback from the board and close out with our timeline moving forward and what you can expect to see from this work. And so just to start us off, it's been a lot to get us to this point. I think we know that there have been a multitude of plans, some population specific plans, the regional action framework, the National Innovation Service report. We ran 40 workshops in July and engaged over 500 different people. We then have a year of sub-regional engagement. I know my team has been engaged with close to 600 different stakeholders around the county. We have our regular touch points with the Lived Experience Coalition. Our programs teams have set up base building spaces, which are very specific to different program types, to have a more regular touch point and focused conversations on different program types as well. We have the vehicle residency and high acuity work groups, and looking also to recent reports done, such as the youth and young adult cardio report and other reports such as the Ingersoll report. So I raise all of those things to say we are building on a lot. We are feeling quite grounded in also what a community's priorities right now are, and we are not starting from zero, but rather getting very specific around what are the things we want to accomplish in the next 5 years together to best address the needs of this community. And with that, it's also important to center that our core values remain the same in this work, and we're continuing to uphold our commitment to centering lived experience and leading with a racial equity lens. And as we've been reminded and encouraged by our Lived Experience Coalition leadership team, that really everything within our 5-year plan must operate within this paradigm. And as a reminder also to the public, our founding legislation requires us to use an equitable decision-making framework and to be operating under these principles. And I think you'll see our commitment as will remain reflected in everything that's coming through on our 5-year plan. And so at this point, you might be wondering, what will the 5-year plan actually look like? And so here is how we are structuring our vision and strategies for the following framework. We have system goals, which are tied to objectives. Objectives are tied, each objective will have initiatives, and initiatives have supporting activities. And so our system goals are really, what's our vision for the next 5 years? Our objectives then are, what do we need to accomplish in order to achieve and work towards that vision? Our initiatives are really coloring that. How are we going to go about achieving that? So the strategic process for how we're going to work on the objectives. And then our activities are the specific actions that we'll actually do to make progress. And this will support in upcoming work planning as we look over the next few years, as we really get clear about what we're capable to do, as we have a lot on our plate. And so hopeful that this will lead to responsible work planning over the next couple of years to ensure that we are committing to what this plan will lay out. And so to color this framework a bit with kind of a cheesy example, and because I'm in the back to school spirit, this tree kind of shows the relationship between these levels. So if my goal is to become the valedictorian, my objective is to get a 4.0 this semester, then I have 2 supporting initiatives. I'm going to begin a study group for AP Calculus because maybe math isn't my strong suit, and I'm going to sleep at least 8 hours a night. Some of the supporting activities for those initiatives mean creating a topic schedule for my study group. What are we going to study for the next couple, week of each the semester? And I need to send out a doodle poll to schedule those out for the rest of the year to make sure everybody can attend. For sleeping 8 hours a night, I'm going to turn off my phone by 9 o'clock and drink less coffee. Maybe I'll switch from coffee to tea instead. So that kind of cheesy example is just to color this out a little bit, the relationship between these levels, and further the logic between the levels of the framework. And so with that, today we're bringing before you for consideration 6 proposed system goals. And I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of each of these, and then I'd like to describe how we landed and on each of these goals as a priority for and why it landed as a system goal, and then talk through the framework and some of the draft objectives. So to summarize, our 6 proposed system goals are: first, to expand capacity for services; second, to significantly reduce unsheltered homelessness; third is ending homelessness for unaccompanied youth, young adults; fourth is end unsheltered homelessness for families and children in King County; fifth, reducing racial disproportionalities in unsheltered homelessness; and sixth, consolidate our homelessness response system and improve system accountability to folks experiencing homelessness. And so taking us to the first proposed system goal, this was identified as a longer term priority in the regional action framework. And I think it's worth sharing, and what has been touched on earlier is we really have a need to expand capacity for services. The capacity of our system has been uplifted in almost every workshop space that was held in July. It's something we hear consistently, the need for support and capacity building across the board. And so while identified as a longer term priority in the regional action framework, it's become really clear that there's also a level of high urgency around this. And so really elevating it as a system goal in the 5-year plan felt particularly urgent. And with that, we have some draft supporting objectives to work on that piece. The first of which is stabilizing our workforce. Then we have increased federal funding for services, increasing state and local funding for services, standardizing person-centered healing-based practice services, increasing capacity building supports for agencies positioned to provide culturally responsive care. And this is inclusive but not limited to LGBTQIA organizations, immigrant and refugee organizations, and other by and for agencies. And lastly, we have developed capacity for severe weather emergencies to meet the needs of folks experiencing homelessness, because as was elevated earlier, we are finding ourselves needing to posture to address severe weather incidents. And with the past couple of years of living in this region, we've seen significant severe heat, snow, smoke, and we have a need to develop capacity to be able to address the needs of folks who may be outside and most in harm's way when we are in those severe and challenging weather circumstances. And so each of these draft objectives, of course, have supporting initiatives that will be tied to them. But taking us to our next proposed system goal around significantly reducing unsheltered homelessness. This was an interim goal identified by the Regional Action Framework. And I think it's something that is not particularly controversial in what we're all really here to do. And when we have our draft objectives included in this, it's been alluded to earlier, but some of the modeling work that is being done will really plug into here as we're looking at that draft objective to expand housing to meet the need. And so we'll have some really fantastic modeling numbers to be able to plug in to support this area. Our Partnership for Zero work also lies within here. But then you'll notice we have a number of outlined areas, particularly related to certain subpopulations, looking at our high acuity communities, vehicle resident communities, seniors, veterans, LGBTQIA adults, people living with disabilities, survivors of gender-based violence and intimate partner violence as well. And so while we have a lot of information and feedback from these communities, we are now going to the stage of working with community partners to get very clear and specific around what do they want to see from us, what feels particularly urgent. And so we're going to be developing those objectives with the stakeholders that are often working and supporting these communities in a very meaningful way. And so that's the next kind of stage of work. But at this juncture, we've identified that we need to develop objectives to support these communities, and we're in the process of identifying and working to set up spaces to develop those objectives and initiatives with community partners. Our next system goal is around ending unsheltered homelessness for families and children in King County, similar to what I had just stated, working with the right community partners. Also want to uplift that we had co-convened a large-scale workshop with Mary's Place and had invited all of our family shelter providers in to run a large-scale workshop where a lot of feedback was provided. It was in person, another event where we were able to bring together a lot of community members, lots of sticky notes, lots of ideas, and lots of energy. And we're looking to tap back into that group, as well as further tapping into and working with, speaking with families who have lived experience of homelessness to further flesh out objectives and initiatives. Our next area is around ending homelessness for unaccompanied youth and young adults. This is also an interim goal identified by the Regional Action Framework, and specifically our Youth and Young Adult Policy Coordinator, Courtney, will be working in this area, as well as working with community partners to develop some draft objectives to tie to this system goal. Further, as we're looking at system goals to reduce racial disproportionalities, really being specific also around the needs of the immigrant refugee community as well. And so wanting to account for and create strategies on how to best meet the needs of folks who are within those communities. And in our last area, we also have consolidating our homelessness response system and continuing to improve system accountability for folks who are experiencing homelessness. Some of our proposed draft objectives here include consolidating and streamlining funding into homelessness services, while also then developing response and treatment options that meet the behavioral health needs of folks experiencing homelessness. And we have some placeholders here also around employment and workforce system coordination and courts and prison system coordination. And so I had planned today to have my colleague Owen join me to talk a little bit more about the Cloudburst work, which is really building on some of the work that had been done with the Washington State Department of Commerce. This is the modeling work that keeps being alluded to, drawing from that qualitative data to really identify the gap in housing and shelter inventory. And that work will also recommend the year-over-year investment required to actually fill that gap. And so at this time, would love to hear feedback about what I've laid out. And I'll stop showing my screen so I can see folks' faces.
Thank you, Alexis. This is fantastic. I'm glad we're able to share this with us. Questions from the board? Okay, I'm jumping in. Everybody gets like 5 seconds. So the one of the under the consolidated response system, I noticed, you'd mentioned sort of the criminal justice system, like talking about behavioral health. Right? I'm wondering where you see the integration with broader health systems, right? Like the person who shows up in the emergency room, people who are aged and struggling with managing their activities of daily living, that sort of thing.
That's something that can absolutely be integrated here. I know we've been talking about, as a strategy, we're expanding Medicaid billing as one strategy, but hearing an explicit prioritization from you around also improving our system relationship with healthcare feels like it can definitely elevate to an objective we can have.
Okay. Thanks, Alexis.
Just say this is terrific work, Alexis, and all the people who've been involved in it. It's both comprehensive and deep, and will have the ability to transform the system when implemented. I am aware that the process of approval is important, and I would ask you, Simha, to as we, in the next few months, as we meet, to choreograph very carefully the timing of our meetings so that we have sufficient time to discuss these matters, such that if they need to be, this needs to be approved in December, that it's done. And then we take some care about the rolling out about this, because this is not just another 5-year plan. This has transformational capabilities based on the goals that are there and the work and investment of people with lived experience and people on the ground accompanying people experiencing homelessness at the core of this. So the rolling out is really important as well. So I just want to give it the time and care that's necessary so that we can do our job. Thanks, Alexis.
Thanks for the feedback, Michael. We will definitely make this the priority over the coming months. Alexis, what other support do you need from us as either as a board or individual board members who have expertise in various fields?
I think it's exactly that point, your expertise. You all have been selected to be a part of this board because of the expertise you bring. And I think, Sarah, just to acknowledge what you had put in the chat around Medicaid expansion, would love to be able to tap you in that capacity to have that conversation. Similarly, Simha wanting to talk now about our healthcare system and system connections. So I think that is the greatest value add you all can provide at this juncture. Would want to be able to lean into the expertise that you bring.
Other thoughts or comments from the board? That's great. I am just so impressed by how quickly and how much feedback you're able to get from the community, in terms of the numbers of people we're engaged with and the number of communities. So this is fantastic. I don't see any additional comments or questions. And we are coming up to the top of the hour here. All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second?
I second.
All those in favor? Say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Well, this meeting of the September meeting of the Implementation Board of the King County Regional Homeless Authority is adjourned, and we will see all of you in October, and we will be certain to make additional discussion of the 5-year plan one of our priorities. All right. Take care all, and thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.